Story 1. The Woman Who Needed a Ride Full. My name is Daniel. I'm 32 and I live just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. I work long shifts at a warehouse distribution center, and for the most part my routine is painfully predictable. Clock in move boxes for 8 to 10 hours, clock out and drive home on the same empty road I've taken for years. It's not the kind of life where you expect anything unusual to happen. And maybe that's exactly why what happened that night caught me so off guard. It was close to midnight when I left work. The air was still warm, even for that time of night, and the road I usually took was almost completely empty, just long stretches of asphalt cutting through dry land and scattered trees. No traffic lights, barely any houses, just darkness broken up by the reach of your headlights. About 10 minutes into the drive, I saw someone standing on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, or maybe a sign. But as I got closer, I realized it was a woman. She looked to be in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, wearing a light-colored jacket and jeans. One arm was wrapped around her body like she was cold or uncomfortable, and the other was slightly raised like she wasn't entirely sure if she should be asking for help. I slowed down without really thinking about it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was just that feeling you get when you see someone alone in the middle of nowhere and assume they must need help. I rolled my window down just a little and asked if she was okay. She stepped closer, not too close, but enough that I could see her face more clearly. She didn't look panicked. That was the first thing I noticed. She looked calm. Too calm for someone supposedly stranded in the middle of nowhere at midnight. She told me her car had broken down a few miles back and her phone had died. She asked if I could give her a ride to a gas station. Her voice was steady, almost flat, like she'd said the same thing multiple times before. I hesitated for a second, but nothing about the situation was obviously wrong. People break down. Phones die. It happens. So I unlocked the passenger door. She got in quietly, said thank you, and shut the door. For the first minute or two, everything felt normal. I asked her where the nearest gas station was, expecting a simple answer. Instead, she paused. Just for a second, but it was enough for me to notice. Then she said she'd guide me. That was the first moment something felt off. Not wrong, just off. I brushed it off and started driving. The silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. I tried making small talk, asking where she was coming from, how long she'd been out there. Basic questions. Her answers were short and vague. She didn't elaborate. She didn't ask me anything in return. It felt less like a conversation and more like I was talking to someone who didn't want to be there. A few minutes passed, and then I noticed something else. She kept looking at the side mirror. Not at me, at the road ahead, but behind us. At first, I thought maybe she was nervous about something, maybe worried about being out there alone for so long. But the way she kept checking, it didn't feel like fear. It felt like she was waiting for something. I asked her if everything was okay. She nodded without really looking at me, and then told me to take a left at the next turn. I followed her direction. The road we turned onto was narrower, darker, with even fewer lights than before. Trees started lining the sides more closely, and the feeling of isolation intensified almost immediately. I asked if we were close, and she said, almost, but her tone didn't match the word. It sounded tense, controlled. That's when I started paying more attention to the directions she was giving me. They didn't make sense, not to me. I had lived in that area for years, and there wasn't a gas station in that direction. I asked her again where exactly we were going, and this time she didn't answer. She just kept looking at the mirror. That's when I looked too. At first, I didn't see anything, just darkness. Then, after a few seconds, I noticed headlights. Far behind us, but definitely there. I don't know why, but something in my chest tightened. It wasn't just the fact that there was another car. It was the way she reacted to it. The way she kept checking like she needed to know exactly where it was at all times. I slowed the car slightly and said I thought we might be heading the wrong way. That's when everything shifted. She turned her head toward me, not fully, just enough for me to see her expression clearly for the first time since she got in. And she said very calmly, "Just keep driving." There was no emotion in her voice, no urgency, no fear, just certainty. It didn't feel like a suggestion. It felt like something she expected me to obey. I didn't respond right away. I just kept driving, but my mind was racing. The headlights behind us were getting closer. Not fast, not aggressively, just steadily. I could feel my grip tightening on the steering wheel. Every instinct I had was telling me something wasn't right. So I made a decision. At the next turn, instead of following her direction, I pressed the gas slightly and took a sharp right onto a wider road I recognized. The reaction was immediate. She raised her voice, asking what I was doing, telling me I was going the wrong way, that I needed to turn back. But I didn't slow down. I didn't argue. I just kept driving, heading toward the nearest place I knew would have lights and people. After about 2 minutes, I saw a small gas station up ahead, still open, lights bright against the darkness. I pulled into the parking lot and parked right near the entrance. The moment the car stopped, everything went quiet. She didn't say anything. She just reached for the handle, opened the door, and got out. No thank you. No hesitation. She walked away quickly, heading toward the side of the building, and disappeared from view. I sat there for a few seconds trying to process what had just happened. Then, almost without thinking, I looked back toward the road we came from. The headlights I had seen earlier approached the entrance of the gas station. The car slowed down as it passed, almost like it was checking the lot, and then continued driving without stopping. I stayed there for a while longer than I probably needed to, just sitting in the car with the engine running. I don't know what her plan was. I don't know who was in that car behind us. But I do know one thing. She wasn't just a stranded woman looking for a ride. And if I had kept driving, I don't think I would have made it back home that night. Story 2. The Man Who Needed My Phone. Full. My name is Eric. I'm 24, and at the time this happened, I was working the closing shift at a small convenience store just outside a highway in Ohio. It wasn't a busy place, especially late at night. After around 10 p.m., the flow of customers would slow down to almost nothing, just the occasional truck driver or someone grabbing a late snack. Most nights, it was quiet enough that you could hear the hum of the refrigerators and the buzzing of the fluorescent lights more clearly than anything else. That night started exactly like that. Calm, uneventful, normal. And I remember thinking how it was going to be one of those easy shifts where you just count down the minutes until closing. It was around 11:30 p.m. when the door chimed, and someone walked in. I glanced up out of habit. The guy looked pretty ordinary. Mid-30s average build, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. His hood wasn't up, and his face didn't stand out in any way. If anything, he looked tired, like someone who had just gotten off a long shift. He walked straight to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and came up to the counter. Nothing unusual. I rang him up, and as I handed him his change, he asked if he could use my phone. He said his had died, and he needed to call someone for a ride. That kind of thing happened every now and then, so I didn't think much of it. I hesitated for maybe a second, then unlocked my phone and handed it to him. He stepped a few feet away from the counter, not too far. just enough to have a bit of privacy, and started dialing. At first, everything seemed normal. He held the phone to his ear, spoke quietly, almost like he didn't want me to hear the conversation. I wasn't paying close attention at the beginning. I was just organizing the counter-straightening receipts, doing the usual small tasks. But after a few seconds, something about the way he was talking made me look up again. His tone had changed. It wasn't louder, but it was more controlled, focused. He was speaking in short, clipped sentences. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught bits and pieces. "Yeah, I'm here." Pause. "No, just me." Another pause. Then, "Wait a bit." There was something about the way he said that last part that made me feel uneasy. It didn't sound like he was talking to a friend coming to pick him up. It sounded like he was giving instructions. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was overthinking. People talk differently on the phone all the time. But then he turned slightly, angling his body away from me, more like he was trying to block my view. When he finished the call, he didn't immediately come back to the counter. He just stood there for a second, staring at the screen. Then he slowly turned around and walked back toward me. I reached out to take my phone, and he handed it back without saying anything. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and that's when I noticed the difference. The tired, almost blank expression he had when he first walked in was gone. Now he looked alert, calculating, like he was paying attention to everything around him. I asked if everything was okay, just to break the silence. He nodded once, but instead of leaving, he stayed there, just standing in front of the counter. That's when the atmosphere shifted. It's hard to explain exactly what it felt like, but the store suddenly didn't feel as safe as it had just minutes before. He started looking around, slowly, not in a curious way, but in a deliberate one. His eyes moved from the front door to the windows, then to the aisles, then up toward the security cameras mounted in the corners. He wasn't just glancing. He was studying, like he was memorizing the layout. I felt my stomach tighten a little. I asked if he needed anything else, hoping that would prompt him to leave. He shook his head, but he still didn't move. Then he asked what time I closed. I told him midnight, about 30 minutes from then. He nodded again, slower this time, like he was filing that information away. Then mildly he turned and walked out of the store. The door chimed as it closed behind him, and for a second, everything went back to being quiet again. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. I stood there for a moment, replaying the conversation in my head. The way he spoke on the phone, the way he looked around, the way his expression changed. It didn't sit right. About 5 minutes later, I noticed headlights outside. A car pulled into the lot, but it didn't park in one of the spots near the entrance. It just sat there, engine running. The headlights were pointed toward the store, making it hard to see inside the car. I watched it for a few seconds, trying to tell myself it was nothing. Then another car drove by, slowly, almost like it was checking the place out. That's when something clicked. I grabbed my phone and unlocked it, checking the recent apps. The map app was open. I knew I hadn't used it. My location was still active, the little blue dot, showing exactly where the store was. My chest tightened. He hadn't just made a call. He had pulled up my location. And if he had sent that to someone, they knew exactly where I was. I looked back out at the parking lot. The car was still there, idling, not moving, not leaving, just waiting. I didn't waste any more time. I walked over to the front door and locked it, flipping the sign to closed even though it was still early. My hands were shaking more than I wanted to admit. I turned off some of the front lights to make it less obvious that I was still inside, and moved toward the back room where there were no windows. I stayed there listening. Every small sound felt amplified. The hum of the machines, the faint noise of cars passing in the distance. At one point, I thought I heard something near the door like footsteps, or maybe someone testing the handle, but I couldn't be sure. I didn't go check. I just stayed quiet and waited. Eventually, after what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, I heard the car outside drive away. I didn't come out of the back until well after midnight. The rest of the shift passed without anything else happening, but the feeling stayed with me. The next morning, I told my manager everything. He checked the cameras, but there wasn't much to see beyond what I had already noticed. The guy came in, made the call, looked around, and left. The car outside wasn't clearly visible. No license plate, no faces, nothing concrete. Just enough to make you wonder. I still think about that night sometimes, about how normal it all seemed at first, about how easy it was to just hand over my phone without a second thought, and about that moment when I realized I might have just told someone exactly where to find me. Story 3. The knock on my door. My name is Melissa. I'm 29, and I live alone in a small suburban neighborhood in Oregon. It's the kind of place where nothing really happens. Quiet streets, spaced out houses. Neighbors who wave, but don't really talk much beyond that. I've lived there for almost 3 years, and up until this happened, I never once felt unsafe in my own home. That's probably why I opened the door that night, or at least why I opened it as much as I did. It was a little after 10 p.m. when the storm started getting bad. Rain was hitting the windows hard enough to make a constant drumming sound, and the wind was strong enough to shake the trees in my backyard. I had just finished cleaning up the kitchen and was getting ready to settle in for the night, maybe watch something before going to bed. Everything felt normal, comfortable, safe. Then I heard the knock. It wasn't loud. It wasn't frantic. It was slow, deliberate. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. I froze immediately. I wasn't expecting anyone. No friends, no deliveries, nothing. For a second, I thought maybe I had imagined it. Then it came again. Same pattern. Same calm, controlled knock. I walked slowly toward the front door, trying not to make too much noise. The hallway light was off, so the only light was coming from the living room behind me. I leaned forward and looked through the peephole. There was a man standing on my porch. He looked to be in his mid-40s. Average height, average build, wearing a dark jacket. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, like he wasn't bothered by the storm at all. That was the first thing that stood out to me. He wasn't hunched over. He wasn't trying to shield himself from the rain. He was just standing there. I hesitated for a few seconds, debating whether I should even respond. But then that voice in the back of my mind kicked in. The one that says maybe someone actually needs help. Maybe something happened. So I unlocked the door, but I didn't open it all the way, just enough to talk through the gap. I asked if he needed something. He turned his head slightly and looked directly at me. His expression was calm. Too calm. He said his car had broken down a little further down the street and asked if he could come inside to use my phone. His voice was steady, polite even. If I had seen him during the day, I probably wouldn't have thought twice about it. But something about the situation didn't add up. I glanced past him, trying to see if there was any sign of a car nearby. I couldn't see anything through the rain and darkness. Then I noticed something else. His jacket wasn't wet, not even a little. The rain was heavy enough that anyone standing outside for more than a few seconds should have been soaked. But he looked completely dry. I asked him where exactly his car was, and he vaguely pointed down the street without turning around to look. That answer felt rehearsed, like he had already decided what he was going to say before I even asked. My grip on the door tightened slightly. I told him I could call someone for him if he gave me a number, but I wasn't comfortable letting him inside. That's when he tilted his head slightly and said my name. Not just my first name. My full name. My stomach dropped instantly. I had never seen this man before in my life. I didn't have a name tag on. There was no reason for him to know who I was. I asked him how he knew that trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the panic starting to build. He didn't answer right away. He just smiled. It wasn't a wide smile. It was subtle, controlled, like he was amused by something I didn't understand. Then he said, "I think you can help me." The way he said it made my skin crawl. It didn't feel like a request anymore. It felt like he had already decided that I was going to help him whether I wanted to or not. That's when I noticed where he was looking. He wasn't looking at me anymore. His eyes had shifted slightly, peering past me into the house, taking in the layout, the hallway, the living room behind me. It felt like he was studying it the same way someone studies a place they're about to enter. That was enough for me. I told him again that I couldn't let him inside and started closing the door. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't push or argue. He just stood there, watching me. The door clicked shut, and I immediately locked it. Then I locked the second latch, and the third. I turned off the hallway light completely and stepped back, trying to stay as quiet as possible. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stood there for a few minutes, not moving, just listening. The storm outside continued, but underneath it, I thought I could hear something else. Movement. Subtle, but there. Like footsteps on the porch. Then, nothing. I didn't go back to the door. I didn't look through the peephole again. I just stayed where I was frozen, waiting for any sign that he was still there. After what felt like a long time, maybe 20 minutes or so, I slowly made my way to the living room window and carefully peeked through the curtain. The porch was empty, no sign of him anywhere. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. Something still felt wrong. The next morning, when the rain had stopped and the sky was clear, I went outside to check. At first, everything looked normal. But then I walked along the side of the house and saw them. Footprints. Muddy footprints leading along the side of the house toward the backyard. My backyard is fenced. There's no reason for anyone to be back there unless they climbed over. I followed the prints as far as I could, but they eventually disappeared near the fence line. I called the police and reported it, but there wasn't much they could do. No clear evidence. No description beyond what I had already given. No car. No witnesses. Just a man who showed up in the middle of a storm, asking for help. I don't open my door at night anymore. Not for anyone. Because I still don't know how he knew my name, or how long he had been watching before he knocked. Hashtag Story 4. Helping a customer carry something full. My name is Jason. I'm 27, and at the time this happened, I was working at a mid-sized electronics store in a shopping plaza just outside of Denver. It wasn't a bad job, mostly routine stuff, helping customers find products, answering questions, restocking shelves. The kind of place where everything is predictable, structured, and for the most part, safe. Especially because we were always told the same thing. Stay professional, be helpful, and if a customer needs assistance, you give it. That mindset is probably the only reason I agreed to help him that night, without thinking twice. It was around 8:45 p.m., about 15 minutes before closing. The store was mostly empty. Just a couple of customers browsing, and a co-worker in the back organizing inventory. I was near the front when a man approached me holding a boxed monitor. He looked normal, Maybe late 30s, clean-shaven, wearing a jacket and jeans. Nothing about him stood out. He asked if I could help him carry the box to his car. That was a completely normal request. We did that all the time. So I said sure, and grabbed one side of the box. It was heavier than it looked, but manageable. We walked toward the exit together, and as we stepped outside, I noticed how quiet the parking lot was. The store was part of a larger plaza, but most of the other shops had already closed. The lights were still on, but there were fewer cars than usual, and the farther you moved from the entrance, the darker it got. At first, I assumed his car would be parked somewhere close. Most customers didn't want to carry something heavy too far. But instead of heading toward the main row of parking spaces near the entrance, he kept walking past them. I adjusted my grip on the box and asked casually if his car was nearby. He said, "Yeah, just a little further." His tone was calm, almost dismissive, like it wasn't worth questioning. So I kept walking. We passed the last row of well-lit parking spots and moved toward the far end of the lot, where the lights were dimmer, and there were only a handful of cars scattered around. That's when I started to feel it. That slight shift in your gut when something doesn't quite make sense. I looked around briefly. There were no other people nearby. No movement. Just the distant hum of traffic from the main road. I asked again where his car was this time, a little more directly. He pointed ahead without really looking, saying, "Right over there." But there wasn't anything obvious in the direction he pointed. Just more empty space. We kept walking. At that point, I started to slow down slightly, not enough for him to notice right away, but enough to give myself a second to think. Why would someone park this far away when there were closer spots available? Why didn't he bring a cart? Why wasn't he offering to switch sides or adjust the weight? And then another thought hit me. I hadn't seen him check out at the register. I hadn't heard a transaction go through. It's something you don't usually think about in the moment, but once it crosses your mind, it sticks. I stopped walking completely. The sudden shift made the box tilt slightly, and he looked back at me for the first time since we left the store. I told him maybe we should grab a cart instead, that it would be easier than carrying it this far. For a split second, he didn't say anything. Then he smiled. Not in a friendly way. More like he was trying to cover something. He said, "We're almost there." But his tone had changed. It wasn't casual anymore. It was firmer, more insistent. I didn't move. I just stood there, holding my side of the box. The silence between us stretched for a few seconds longer than it should have. Then I said, "I think I'm going to head back inside." That's when his expression changed completely. The smile disappeared. His face went flat, emotionless. He didn't argue. He didn't try to convince me. He just stared at me. And in that moment, something about the way he looked at me made it very clear that I had made the right decision. I slowly lowered my side of the box onto the ground and stepped back. I didn't turn around immediately. I just kept my eyes on him for a second, waiting to see how he would react. But he didn't move. He just stood there, looking at me. So I turned and started walking back toward the store. I didn't run. I didn't want to escalate anything. But I walked fast, faster than I normally would. I could feel his presence behind me, even though I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't look back until I was halfway across the lot. When I did, he was still standing there, exactly where I left him. The box was still on the ground, and he was still watching me. I got back inside the store and immediately told my coworker what had happened. We checked the front registers to see if there was a transaction for the monitor. There wasn't. No receipt. No record of a purchase. That box shouldn't have left the store at all. We told the manager the next day, and he reviewed the security footage. The guy had walked in, picked up the box, and wandered around the store for a bit. But he never actually bought anything. He just waited. Waiting for someone to offer help. Waiting for someone like me. I don't know what his plan was. Maybe he just wanted to get me alone. Maybe there was someone else out there waiting. Or maybe something worse. But I do know this. That night, I didn't help a customer carry something to his car. I almost helped someone lead me somewhere I shouldn't have gone. And if I hadn't trusted that feeling in my gut, I don't know where I would have ended up. Story 5. Looking for a missing child. My name is Kevin. I'm 34, and this happened to me on a Saturday afternoon at a public park just outside of Seattle. It wasn't late. It wasn't dark. That's probably the part that still bothers me the most. Because when people think about dangerous situations, they usually imagine them happening at night in empty places when you're alone. This wasn't like that at all. It was the middle of the day. Families were out. Kids were playing, people walking their dogs, the usual weekend scene. I had gone there just to clear my head. I had a few hours to kill, so I grabbed a coffee and sat down on a bench near one of the walking trails. It was quiet enough to relax, but not so empty that you felt isolated. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. I had been sitting there for maybe 15 minutes when a man approached me. I noticed him before he said anything, mostly because of the way he was moving. He wasn't running, but he wasn't exactly walking casually either. There was a kind of urgency to his steps, like he was looking for something. Or someone. He looked to be in his early 40s, wearing a gray hoodie and dark pants. Nothing about his appearance stood out in any obvious way, but there was something about his expression that caught my attention. He looked concerned, but not panicked. Focused, but not desperate. It was subtle, but it didn't quite match the situation he was about to describe. He stopped a few feet in front of me and asked if I had seen a little girl. He said she was about 6 years old, wearing a pink jacket, and that she had wandered off. The moment he said that, I stood up without even thinking about it. If a kid is missing, you help. That's just automatic. I asked him when he last saw her, and he said not long ago, but he didn't give a specific time. I asked where she had gone missing from, and he vaguely pointed toward a different part of the park. As he spoke, I started to notice small things that didn't sit right. The way he described her kept shifting. First, he said she had blonde hair. Then, a few seconds later, he mentioned brown. He said she was wearing sneakers, then corrected himself and said sandals. It could have been stress, I told myself. People get details wrong when they're worried. But the thing was, he didn't seem worried. Not in the way you would expect. He wasn't calling her name. He wasn't looking around frantically. He wasn't asking other people nearby. He was just standing there talking to me, watching me very closely. I asked how long she had been missing, and he paused before answering like he had to think about it. Then he said, "A while." That answer didn't make any sense. If your kid has been missing for a while, you don't calmly walk up to one person and start a quiet conversation. You make noise. You draw attention. You get help from everyone. That's when the feeling hit me. That quiet, creeping sense that something wasn't adding up. I asked him if he had already contacted park staff or security. He shook his head and said he wanted to check one more area first. Then he pointed toward a trail that led deeper into the wooded part of the park. It was one of those narrower paths, less crowded, more isolated. He asked if I could go down there and see if I could find her while he checked somewhere else. That was the moment everything shifted. Up until then, I had been focused on the idea of a missing child. But now, I started thinking about the situation differently. Why would he split up from the only person who had agreed to help him? Why send me alone into a more isolated area instead of searching together? I looked back toward the main part of the park. There were still people around. Families, couples, groups. Safe. Then I looked at the trail he was pointing at. It was quiet, almost empty. The trees were thicker there, blocking out more of the light. I hesitated, and he noticed. His expression changed slightly. Not dramatically, but enough that I could see the shift. The concern in his face faded, just a little replaced by something else, something colder. He asked again, this time more directly, if I could just check the trail quickly. His tone had changed. It wasn't a request anymore. It felt more like pressure. That's when I made a decision. I told him it would be better if we found park staff and searched together. The reaction was immediate. His entire demeanor changed. The urgency disappeared. The concern vanished. In its place was irritation, almost annoyance, like I had just made things inconvenient for him. He shook his head and said never mind, that he would handle it himself. Then he turned and started walking away quickly. Not toward the area he had originally pointed to, not toward where he claimed the child had gone missing. Just away. I stood there for a moment watching him leave, trying to process what had just happened. Then I looked around. I scanned the park, the playground, the walking paths, the benches. I didn't see any sign of a missing child. No one calling out. No one searching. No commotion. Nothing. It was like the situation he described didn't exist at all. I sat back down slowly, my mind replaying the conversation over and over. The inconsistencies, the lack of urgency, the way he watched me, and the way he reacted when I refused to go with his plan. That's when the realization hit me. There was no child. There never was. Whatever he wanted, it had nothing to do with finding anyone. I stayed in the park for a while longer, but I didn't feel comfortable anymore. Every movement around me felt different. Every stranger suddenly seemed like someone I needed to pay closer attention to. Before I left, I spoke to a park employee and described what had happened. They said they hadn't received any reports of a missing child that day. Not a single one. I still think about that sometimes, about how easily I stood up ready to help without questioning anything, and about how close I came to walking down that trail, alone, with someone who clearly had no intention of finding a lost child. Because the truth is, some people don't ask for help because they need it. They ask for help because they're trying to find the kind of person who will say yes.